Afghanistan 1978. A Marxist revolution brings communists to power. But not everyone in the country's multi-ethnic population likes their ideology. Civil war breaks out. Soviet leaders decide to help the communist government of Afghanistan by sending troops to support them. December 1979, the Soviet army invades. It's obvious that helicopters will play a significant role in the war. In the event, they're often the only method of delivering and supporting troops. The Afghan war sees a continuous build-up of helicopter units, with Mi-8 being the main helicopter type. Mi-8 becomes the workhorse of the Soviet army in Afghanistan. But it's the Mi-8 crews that have to shoulder all the burdens and hardships of this war, from beginning to end. The Magnificent Eight, Episode 2, Moving Forward. Mountainous desert terrain, widely varying temperatures, high humidity. These difficult climate conditions demonstrate the advantages of the Mi-8 helicopter and even help to reduce its deficiencies. Before the Afghan War, the Soviet helicopter fleet had consisted mostly of the Mi-8 MT. Export version of that is the Mi-17. These helicopters have TV-3-117 engines. The Soviet Air Force also use earlier Mi-8 versions with less lifting capacity, as well as Mi-24 combat helicopters and Mi-6 heavy transports. Most crews are trained for combat missions in flat terrain only. Only border troop pilots have flying experience in mountainous areas. So crews without that experience start urgent training for mountain operations. During the first winter of the Afghan War, Mi-8s are mostly used as transports. But with the arrival of spring, the Mujahideen start active combat operations against the Soviet troops. Combat Mi-24 helicopters are not sufficient, so Mi-8s are used as attack helicopters as well. Mi-8 still mainly delivers troops and provides fire support. Mi-8 pilots are among the first Soviet officers to be decorated as heroes of the Soviet Union for combat in Afghanistan. There's Major Vasily Sherbakov and Major Vyacheslav Genutdinov. One of the most difficult missions is delivering to mountain outposts. Sometimes there's hardly enough space to land. So the pilot hovers the helicopter with one wheel balanced on a rock shelf while the soldiers unload themselves and the cargo. It's good on-the-job training. The pilots sometimes do 5 or 6 flights a day. They spend up to 8 hours in the air. To start with, the pilots use accepted procedure and fly at very low level. But that doesn't work in highland Afghanistan. They don't wait for new flight operating procedures to arrive. To keep out of ground fire, they start flying at higher altitudes. They also do high-G maneuvers, steep dives, pull-ups, aggressive turns. A lot of pilots go on to say that Afghanistan taught them how to fly helicopters. We knew the Mi-8 flight limitations perfectly well, speed, altitude, weight, but sometimes, no point in pretending otherwise, we had to break the limits to save our lives. For example, Mi-8 max speed is 250 kilometers an hour, but under fire we quite often dived at 300 kilometers an hour or even faster. Mi-8 took that punishment and saved our lives. He probably wouldn't have said that at the time. After all, the rules are the rules. When the Mi-8 designers and engineers arrived in Afghanistan, they realized that Mi-8 pilots were exceeding all the limits in combat. Happened every time. For example, the maximum bank angle for an Mi-8 transport was 30 degrees. That's what the book said. But pilots flew 50, 60, even 70 degrees. So we decided to do some tests and change the limitations, not just for the Mi-8, but for all helicopters in Afghanistan. As a result, the combat limits were increased, sometimes even doubled. Also, with the help of the Gromov Flight Research Institute, they ran tests to increase the maximum takeoff weight. Amongst other things, they tried different piloting techniques and even rolling takeoffs. One of these flights resulted in the deaths of test pilots Vladimir Turovtsa and Nikolai Bessonov. They had shut down both engines in an auto-rotation test. But they didn't die in vain. Their work helped military pilots make best use of the Mi-8 in the Afghan mountains. Rolling takeoffs and landings reduce the formation of those dust clouds which are so very dangerous for the helicopter. So the Afghan war has really become a test for pilots and designers. Some of the Mi-8 Design Bureau engineers regularly visit Afghanistan to examine the detail of Mi-8's combat capabilities. Combat demonstrates the need for more powerful weapons, offensive and defensive. Sometimes the technicians can fix things in situ. For protection from behind, machine guns are installed in the rear hatches. Heavy machine guns and grenade launchers are set up in the doorways. In Afghanistan, we had helicopter technicians installing machine guns and grenade launchers. Basically, Mi-8's a transport helicopter, but there it had to do combat missions as well, so it needed armament. There were some great ideas for improving combat capability, but it wasn't easy arming transport helicopters. It was always safety first. Wrongly fitted equipment can cause flight safety problems. As I said, some ideas were good enough to go into mass production. The Afghan war helped us to improve the combat effectiveness of the Mi-8. The cockpit gets armor-plated protection inside and out, as do important helicopter components. Shoulder-launched heat-seeking missiles become a threat. Various countermeasures start coming online. Exhaust infrared suppression systems make it possible to reduce exhaust gas temperatures, and that means less of an infrared target for the missile. And flares can decoy the missile away from the helicopter. At first, the flare dispensers are strapped to the tail boom, but later they become fitted as standard for mass production helicopters. There's another heat seeker protection device for the Mi-8 in Afghanistan. It's the so-called infrared jammer. It generates infrared rays to confuse the missile heat seeker. One thing that becomes clear during the war is that engines are not up to the job. Of course, summer heat and thin mountain air reduce engine power. But a worse problem is the permanent dust in the air getting in everywhere. The main problem was the abrasive erosion of blades and engines. The engine compressor blades and free turbine blades were most exposed to the dust particles. It was so bad that engines that normally go 1,000 hours between servicings had to have that figure reduced to 50 hours. We developed special devices to protect the engines from dust. We called them mushrooms. Helicopter tactics are also developing. In air-ground operations or escorting convoys, the Mi-8s become proficient at joint ops, with Mi-24 gunships providing cover. Helicopter units work closely with airborne troops and special forces. In the Afghan war, special forces and helicopter pilots worked in close cooperation. In combat missions, pilots and paratroops rely on each other. We, the pilots, learned tactics from them and trained ourselves. All the pilots learned some necessary skills. If the helicopter came under fire at takeoff or landing, the pilots had to know the right tactic and how to use basic weapons. Sometimes when pilots had free time, they'd go and practice on the shooting range. Paratroops helped a lot. It was very important for all of us to be able to help each other in combat. In Afghanistan, the helicopters fly day and night. When it's dark, the pilots have night vision goggles. Some helicopters have infrared scanners. They've been part of the Soviet Army inventory since shortly after the war started. Helicopters like that stay airborne for hours, watching over the approaches to protected areas. Some of the Mi-8s can mine mountain paths and Mujahideen bases. They have special airborne mine-laying equipment. One of these can cover a strip of land 2 kilometers long with anti-personnel mines. The Mi-8 can soak up a lot of battle punishment. Mujahideen use all sorts of weapons on Mi-8s, but quite often helicopters return to base safely with fuselage and blades badly damaged. I think every pilot who's flown combat in the Mi-8 has a good word for the helicopter. Here's an example. One of the Mi-8 pilots from the squadron based at Lashkargah in Afghanistan managed to land in a minefield. When he got back to base, his helicopter had 262 holes in it. It was just like a colander. I think that shows perfectly well how tough and reliable the Mi-8 is. I'd also say it's a forgiving helicopter. Most of the repairs are done by technicians at the base airfield, but sometimes they fix the helicopters out in the field. The technicians work very quickly. They can fix most of the problems, holes in the fuselage, even new blades within an hour. The Mi-8 is maintenance friendly. Mi-8 pilots regularly risk their lives providing fire support for the Soviet troops in battle or flying rescue missions for them. Quite often the helicopter's the only way out when the troops are surrounded. But the statistics of the Afghan war are appalling. About 178 Mi-8 helicopters are lost. Usually the crews do not survive. In 1989, Soviet troops withdraw from Afghanistan. The Mi-8s cover the withdrawal until all the troops have crossed the bridge at the national border. As a result of the Afghan war, the Mi-8 has become a multi-purpose transport and combat vehicle. It has high power and efficiency, it's highly reliable, and it's a combat survivor. All this and its low cost have pushed the Mi-8 to the top. Mi-8s proved themselves highly effective in the Afghan war, and that was significant in the formation of a new branch of the Soviet ground forces. The year's 1989, and there's now an Army Aviation branch. Helicopter combat units come directly under Ground Forces Command instead of the Air Force. That military restructuring improved the effectiveness of helicopters in combat. The 1986 Chernobyl disaster is probably the worst nuclear power plant accident ever. Mi-8s and their crews are in the front line of the battle to contain the contamination and avert a greater catastrophe. but the radiation can only be measured close up. Helicopters hover over the destroyed reactor, dropping bags of sand and lead and boric acid. You can only do this dangerous work with helicopters. It's only a few hours after the disaster, and Mi-8s are the first to fly over the devastated reactor. December 1991, the whole Soviet Union collapses. The country breaks up into separate independent states. Like everything else, Mi-8 is affected when privatization takes over from state control. Private companies take over the ownership of helicopters from the monolithic Soviet Union. Not all of them are helicopter operators. They just start selling Mi-8s at home and abroad, often at giveaway prices. Mi-8s spread around the world, sometimes illegally. Operational limits are sometimes ignored. In the jungles of Africa, for instance, pilots push their helicopters beyond their limits in high temperatures and humidity. It's another stringent test for the Mi-8s, and once again, they pass with flying colors. The collapse of the Soviet Union sparks interethnic armed conflicts in many regions of this formerly vast country. Russian army units flying Mi-8s become the deterrent force in these conflicts. During this transitional period, the economy of young Russia has to cope with challenging times. Links between design bureaus and producers become disrupted. The manufacturers make money by selling helicopters, but they don't necessarily pass it on to the bureaus. And MIL has lost its state support as well. It's short of money. It's become impossible to develop new helicopters or even modernize the existing ones. It's the moment of truth for Mi-8. Can the legendary helicopter continue to develop? Fortunately, Mi-8 has huge potential for further upgrading. Customers are now offered a wide variety of different versions, from basic modification work to fully equipped helicopters. So now it's all down to the customer, but the design bureau and production plants have to start cooperating again. Marketing gradually becomes the new credo. Relationships between manufacturing plants and the MIL Design Bureau had thrived on mutually beneficial cooperation. Design Bureau departments had been present at the Kazan and Ulan-Ude factories to help modernize the Mi-8s. Now the modernization becomes less about design than about upgrading onboard equipment. For military helicopters, the emphasis is on navigation and aiming equipment, as well as the enhancement of survivability and the optimization of armament. Attack weapons become increasingly diverse. The Center for Combat Training and Flight Personnel Training in Torzhok. This is the place where new types of helicopters are tested. Russian and foreign military pilots trained here. From its first days, the Mi-8 came to our Center for Combat Training in Torzhok. Since then, every Mi-8 version has been through here. First it was the Mi-8T, now it's the Mi-8 MTV, and all its modifications from 1 to 5. In the mid-90s, the Center receives a new attack version of the Mi-8 called Mi-8 MTKO, or Mi-17N in its export version. It's an all-weather, day and night aircraft. New flying control systems and navigation equipments facilitate this round-the-clock operation. The multi-screen displays present the crew with all the data they need at any stage of flight. The navigation system provides a facility for searching for things on the ground or in the water, and then defining their coordinates. The system locates targets, guides attack weapons, and corrects artillery fire. It also downlinks target coordinates to command centers. The Mi-17N export version also has a day and night surveillance system. In 2000, this particular helicopter took part in a rescue mission after a terrorist attack in Argun in the Chechen Republic. A truck loaded with explosives had rammed the gates of the Special Police Force post. Guerrillas then surrounded the post. The wounded could only be evacuated by air. And in the darkness, the helicopter came to the rescue. We landed our helicopter there. The landing zone was very small. It was surrounded by 5-floor buildings, so it was like being indoors. It was very windy, which made it hard to control the helicopter. There was panic. It was chaos. We took on 42 or 43 wounded men. It was just horrible. It's really hard to describe. The trouble was, we'd got too many people on board. Our total all-up weight was more than 13 tons. It was too much. But the Mi-8 is a forgiving helicopter, and we managed to take off. We got more than 40 people out in one go. This Mi-8 AMTSH is probably the most heavily armed assault version of the Mi-8. It was designed at the Ulan-Ude factory. The weapons are mounted on 6 external hardpoints. A remote control machine gun defends against attack from behind, and a handheld machine gun for frontal defense. One of the main differences between this and the earlier versions is the anti-tank weapons system and air-launched Igla missiles. It made its first public appearance in 1997. The Mi-8 AMTSH is now operational with the Russian Security Service. I spoke to pilots in the Russian Security Service. They say the Mi-8 AMTSH is a great helicopter. It carries missiles, rockets, bombs, guns, machine guns. That selection of armament was very successful during counter-terrorist actions in Chechnya. The pilot said the helicopter was amazing. The Afghan war experience has come in useful in the mountains of Central Asia and the Caucasus. There, helicopters fly reconnaissance missions, as well as troop delivery and fire support. New equipment for the Mi-8 allows the radio communications of guerrillas to be monitored. It can also be part of an electronic warfare suite. Russian helicopters have taken part in UN peacekeeping missions. Mi-8s have flown alongside foreign helicopters, and that means that comparisons can be drawn. When we flew in Sudan, there were Puma helicopters with us. Compared to Mi-8s, Pumas need special care. Every 2 or 3 flights, their technicians have to do some servicing. But the Mi-8 is not like that. You could say it's maintenance light. Simpler, more practical. That's traditionally been a feature of Soviet-made stuff as compared to Western kit. That has actually made some Soviet weapons very popular in many places. It's a bit like the Kalashnikov AK-74 rifle and the M16. For accuracy, choose the American rifle over the Soviet. But the AK-74 can put up with a lot of dirt, and that's a key factor in war. And just like the AK-74, the Mi-8 helicopter sometimes operates where no other helicopter can fly. They say you can't imagine a Russian soldier without a Kalashnikov. I think you can't imagine a Russian helicopter pilot without an Mi-8. There's another reason why it's so popular. It's the sheer quantity of Mi-8 versions all around the world. In helicopter history, the number of aircraft produced is unprecedented for its class. By 2011, more than 12,000 Mi-8s have been built. No other medium-class helicopter comes close. It's the start of a new millennium, and there's another new Mi-8 version, the Mi-8 MTV5, or for export, Mi-17 V5. Another new generation, more design improvements. A new door on the right. The door on the left is wider. There's a loading ramp instead of the clamshell doors. Now it only takes 3 seconds to abandon the helicopter. The look changes with a new dolphin nose. Inside the new shaped nose cone is weather radar and new radio equipment. There's another new flight navigation system. The cockpit has new kit to support night vision goggles. In 2001 comes a new version specially for China, the Mi-17 V6. It's designed for mountainous terrain. With new engines, its service ceiling is now 7,950 meters. Unusually, the engines can be started at 6,000 meters altitude. This helicopter can take off and land at 5,500 meters. Most rotorcraft don't operate well above 4,000 meters. That offers great potential for this practical, working helicopter. Some Mi-8 helicopters become test-bed airframes to try out various design characteristics. Many such solutions get incorporated into the Mi-28 combat and Mi-38 transport helicopters. But still, the Mi-8 isn't done. Nothing's perfect. There's always something to improve in a helicopter's design. You improve it by updating it. The Mi-8 helicopter has always had huge potential for development. These days, the helicopter continues to go through constant updating. One thing that's always under development is day-night operation in all weathers. It's often new onboard equipment that improves the helicopter's capabilities. Terrain following, which reduces the risk of radar detection, is important. It can be done either manually or automatically. Other aids help the pilot take off and land on unprepared surfaces when the visibility is not good. In the near future, another new version of the Mi-8 helicopter is expected, with multifunctional color displays providing comprehensive flight data to the cockpit. Engineering developments implemented in the Mi-28 and Mi-38 helicopters can be retrofitted to the Mi-8 in the near future. First of all, it's a main rotor made from composite materials. We've already done some flight tests. They show that you get higher thrust, as much as 1 ton more. Also, the tail rotor becomes an X-shaped composite rotor, which is already used on the Mi-28 combat helicopter. All these ideas from the Mi-28 and Mi-38 helicopters will further improve the Mi-8. That'll make it more attractive to buyers and more competitive. Over decades of service, the Mi-8 has successfully carried out numerous different tasks worldwide. Cargo transportation and rescue, reconnaissance and assault missions amongst them. Now, new versions are significantly expanding the scope of its activities. The Mi-8 has the justified reputation of being a true workhorse. In its various versions, it's used by more than 90 countries. Afghanistan now. Today, the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, is involved in combat operations against Taliban militant groups. Apart from American and European helicopters, ISAF also has more than 20 export versions of the Mi-8. In spring 2011, the US bought them for the new Afghan National Army being developed by NATO states. I think they made the decision because the Mi-8 suits Afghanistan perfectly. It's a country with a hot climate and plenty of mountainous terrain. Also, the Mi-8 is cheap. The Mil helicopters are doing a lot of missions in Afghanistan, just as they used to 20 years ago. From the late 60s, the Soviet Union used the Mi-8 for official transport. That started with a custom-built helicopter for Nikita Khrushchev. Nowadays, Mi-8s are still the backbone of the government helicopter unit. These are VIP versions with luxury interiors. And the helicopters like this are also made for big companies and private individuals. Lately, Mi-8s have become an indispensable part of the victory parades in Moscow. They open the proceedings by carrying the ceremonial flags over Red Square. This kind of flight requires much training. Formation flying's difficult. Whether in a fixed-wing aircraft or a helicopter, you need a lot of training. The pilots can only achieve the perfect formation with that regular training. Each flag is huge, 7 meters by 5. To overcome the drag of the flag and to balance the center of gravity, the helicopter has to carry more than 2 tons of ballast. The ballast looks quite small from a distance, but close up you can see it's big. It's a steel cylinder, 80 centimeters diameter and 50 centimeters high. It's about 2 tons of steel. Krasnodar region, Kurinovsk town, 393rd Army Air Base. Early 2011, the airbase gets new Mi-8 AMT-SH helicopters. They've flown a long way from the Ulan-Ude factory. The weather was awful during the flight. The temperature varied from -40 to 0 Celsius. But that was nothing for an Mi-8. All the helicopters arrived safely at Kurinovsk. The pilots are familiarizing themselves with this new version of the good old Mi-8. The cockpit equipment is pretty much like the earlier versions. Yes, there's some new kit in there, but we got used to it pretty quickly. I'd say that once again, it's a pilot-friendly helicopter. From my point of view, the main change in the cockpit is the new weather radar. It's got a color display, and that gives us all the info on weather conditions. There's also a new navigation system which works with both GPS and GLONASS. The cockpit is also equipped for night vision goggles. All of that means that this helicopter is truly day-night, all-weather capable. The Mi-8 AMT-SH is the armed assault version of the Mi-8 AMT. This latest version carries no guided weapons amongst its fit. Utility gun pods and rocket and bomb launch pods can be fitted on 6 external hard points. The nose and the back end of the fuselage have been slightly redesigned. The cockpit is protected with armor plate inside and out. There's a sliding door and a winch with 150 kilos lifting capacity on the left side. There's a ramp at the back that speeds up cargo loading and air dropping. There's also a hatch in the ramp for the rear gunner. This helicopter has got vibration damping. That makes flying a whole lot more comfortable. There's a wide cargo door on the right of the fuselage. The Russian army as a whole is transitioning to new technology and new organizational structures, but the Mi-8 is still the main military transport helicopter in Russia. The Mi-8 helicopter, an aviation design classic. In the hands of a brilliant designer, it became the perfect tool for numerous tasks and missions. You might perhaps compare the Mi-8 with that most sophisticated of musical instruments, the concert grand. The design of that instrument is the end product of long and detailed research by many generations of masters of the musical instrument. A virtuoso playing a concert grand produces the perfect sound. In its state of perfection, the design of the concert grand has been unchanged for more than 2 centuries. In a world of complex machines, helicopters for instance, the Mi-8 is the perfect example of just such a sophisticated instrument. Yes, I like your comparison of the Mi-8 with the concert grand. The sophistication of the musical instrument and the Mi helicopter have much in common. I've said before, the Mi-8 is a great helicopter. We pilots often tell designers, don't change the design. Okay, there are some operational improvements being made, that's fine. But as a flying design, the Mi-8 is perfect. Controllability, control sensitivity, handling, ergonomics, cockpit vision, all great. No need to change it. For 50 years, the Mi-8 helicopter has been continually updated. It's still got a lot of potential for future upgrades. I compare the helicopter to a living organism which constantly grows and evolves. Maybe that's why the Mi-8 is so popular everywhere. It's one reliable machine. I think that Mi-8 will continue for many years into the future as a military and a civilian helicopter. Mikhail Mil himself can never have expected that his Mi-8 would live so long. He knew that scientific and technical progress was inexorable. But in the world of art, it's often the case that the work of the great master has its own unique life. The story of the Magnificent 8 continues, and this Mi helicopter stands a good chance of celebrating its 100th anniversary.